I'm sort of today's Max Gomez. So now it's a real thrill to have Sean Parker join us. Sean was, of course, the co-founder of Napster and the first president of Facebook, also played by Justin Timberlake in the movie, as many of you recall. But lately he's been taking on a whole new social challenge, cancer, and he recently created the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy. Please welcome entrepreneur and philanthropist Sean Parker. Welcome.
Hi.
Nice to see you again, Sean. So we have a lot to talk about. Let's first start by talking about the new Parker Center for Parker Institute, rather, for Cancer Immunotherapy. This was announced recently with a lot of fanfare. Nice party, by the way.
Thank you.
And tell me how you got the idea for doing this. But actually, before we talk about that, tell me how you first became interested in medicine, because I know I interviewed you about a year ago, and we talked a lot about allergies in particular, and it seems to me that might have been the avenue that you pursued initially that got you interested in immunotherapy. Tell me about sort of your interest in medicine in general.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that many of us in Silicon Valley who've been involved with technology for several decades or longer have gotten to a point where I think we've grown a little bit tired and a little bit bored of building consumer internet products largely for teenagers. And you know, there came I think comes a time in everyone's life, and many people in Silicon Valley I think are going through this sort of transformation right now, where you know, they go off in search of doing something that's more meaningful, you know, more inspirational, more relevant to people's lives. And life sciences, you know, we're all engineers or computer scientists, and we're also living through this interesting kind of convergence between the long discussed, but until very recently, largely discussion and very little reality, but this convergence between big data and you know, the needs of big data in life sciences. You know, there were supposedly, coming out of the Human Genome Project, going to be these mountains of data that needed to be analyzed and processed and so forth. And, you know, that turns out that when you're coming from the technology world and you're getting into life sciences or biotech, that's true, but there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done in terms of generating good data so that you don't have a garbage in, garbage out problem. And you know, while many of us came to the field thinking to ourselves, well, you know, we'll be able to lend our computer science skills to this field in some way, I think what we actually found was that things like standardization and whether that's sample collection or you know, multi-center trials that need to get up and running fast, so common IRBs across centers, and all of the other things that go along with collaboration, plus having a technology cores in place so that, you know, a lot of diagnostics can be done during the research process. And it's as a result of all of that work that we will probably find ourselves in a position where, you know, we computer scientists, humble computer scientists who've spent our lives building, you know, social networks and, you know, applications for helping you save a few minutes here and there in your life, or where you press a button and a car shows up, or you press a button and a masseuse shows up, and things of that nature. Those of us coming from that field will find that our skills are actually relevant. Now, that was sort of a long way around to the question you're asking. I mean, my personal interest in immunology definitely comes from the fact that I've grown up with a family of people who all have some form of autoimmune disease. I have anaphylactic allergies, pretty severe asthma, a variety of other problems. And that piqued my interest in the immune system, which is this, as many of you know, it's an incredibly fascinating puzzle and far more complex than I think any of us coming from the technology world and getting into life sciences ever bargained for. Certainly much more complex than even building scalable systems for Facebook. it was an incredibly fascinating puzzle, and as I got deeper into it, I began to realize that we were on the verge of a renaissance in the application of immunology to oncology, and that was potentially a more interesting way to go. So, some number of years ago, actually working with Katie and others, I funded the Stand Up to Cancer Immunotherapy Dream Team.
Thank you.
With many folks in this room. That kind of began my formal education, or I should say informal education, in the field of, immunotherapy.
So tell us a little bit at the paradigm of how this is going to work, Sean, and because it has some similarities to Stand Up, but also some notable differences as well. Specifically, I think with the intellectual property aspect of it. Mm-hmm. But before we talk about the IP, tell me just about sort of the way it's set up and why you think it will be effective.
Well, I mean, the first thing you find when you arrive from the field of technology in Silicon Valley and into the world of academic medicine and life sciences is that everybody spends a lot of time talking about the importance of data sharing and the importance of collaboration. And there's a huge amount of conversation taking place today. I don't know if that was the case a decade ago or 2 decades ago, but certainly today there's a lot of conversation about it, but not a huge amount of tangible progress towards new models to facilitate collaboration, because it turns out that on some level, everybody would love to have access to each other's data, and then when you're trying to solve really complex scientific problems, you need fantastic diagnostics and analytics every step along the way. It would be great if there were some standards in terms of the diagnostics that everybody was doing in their research, and yet there are practical barriers that seem to pop up everywhere in terms of actually sharing data, which certainly there are barriers in terms of sharing discoveries and breakthroughs, so that a breakthrough developed at one center can immediately be utilized by researchers at many other centers without having to worry about licensing issues, or without having to worry about the kind of maze of IP that can sometimes form around various discoveries as they get licensed out to small biotech companies, then consolidated up into large pharma companies. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody who was a technologist and then a venture capitalist, and then someone who's trying to do good in the world of cancer, and I start by trying to diagnose, what are some of the systemic or bureaucratic problems that could be potentially holding the field back.
And so what are you doing to break down those barriers? And I know they're part of it is a financial incentive, isn't it?
Yeah, so the Parker Institute is a $250 million grant, which creates a unified network between 6 centers. Everybody, I think, represented here in this room: Memorial Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson, UCSF, UCLA, Penn Medicine. Did I forget one? Stanford.
Stanford, right.
Thank you.
Not Dana-Farber, though, or Hutch, right?
Not Dana-Farber or Hutch, though we actually have great researchers we work with at both of those at both of those centers. We have a whole other network of affiliated researchers. So within this network, we've created a system where, because the intellectual property generated at each of these centers is administered by the Parker Institute, it's not owned by the Parker Institute. The underlying IP continues to be owned by the centers themselves. But because it's administered centrally, that means that any piece of technology or any breakthrough that's made in one place is immediately usable by all of the member researchers across all of the centers. So that's a helpful thing. It's certainly not the only innovation or the primary innovation. It's really more of a facilitator. So it means that collaboration can happen without any kind of bureaucratic or administrative restraints. So that scientists working in one of our centers can immediately share everything they're doing, including all of their unpublished data, with everybody else across the center. They don't have to worry that there could be, a problem created in terms of, tainting or encumbering their intellectual property, which in most cases is not the overwhelming thing that prevents progress. But it does factor in when you're trying to create a truly collaborative environment, and you want everybody to be able to share all of their ideas openly with one another.
I know that pharmaceutical companies, I know that at Stand Up to Cancer, we work with big pharma and small pharma, right? Biotech companies, different corporations along those lines. What is the role of pharma in the Institute, and how do you see them kind of collaborating with the scientists you're working with?
So, I mean, it's incredibly important that we are able to translate scientific breakthroughs into therapeutics or drugs that in order to make them available to patients. So we have to somehow close that loop. And to that end, we've put in place partnerships with roughly 30 biotech and pharma companies. And it's kind of a two-way street. So the biotech and pharma companies make their medicines or drugs available to researchers within our network. We give them, in some cases, early access or first look at the technology that's coming out of the network. We're also willing to help move forward licensing deals so that we can get access to drugs that our researchers need, and vice versa. We think it's really important that we maintain these close relationships with our pharma partners, because there will come a time that drugs need to be commercialized, and we want to make sure we're there all the way through, seeing that process all the way through to its culmination, which is the FDA approval of a drug that actually has the potential to help not just a handful of people in clinical trials, but a huge, much larger population.
So tell me a little bit more about the financial incentive, because I'm just curious how that works, because as much as we want collaboration, there's still a healthy amount of competition. After all, it's capitalism, right? And everybody wants credit for developing a certain regimen or treatment or therapy, whatever. So how do you kind of incentivize these scientists? Because I know some of these institutions actually are not really keen to collaborate because they want what they're developing to be proprietary, right? So how do you handle that over a slew of institutions and scientists who all want to possibly benefit from these discoveries?
Well, as much as it sounds like a simple idea, it turns out it's incredibly complicated, much more complicated than I think I realized going into it, which is in some ways was a helpful feature. Naivete is usually a good motivator, and if you really knew how complex something was going to be, you might not do it. So it turns out it's pretty complex. But the simple premise remains the same, which is that the intellectual property remains within each of the member centers. Each of our partners retains ownership of their IP. So in terms of credit and in terms of the financial upside, it's all flowing back through directly to our partner centers.
But if there are multiple scientists from multiple centers, how does that work?
Well, that happens already.
Right.
That sort of thing happens today with all kinds of inventions. You'll have multiple people on a patent. You'll have obviously multiple people on a paper, and sometimes those people will span multiple centers. And you do see some high-profile cases, like for instance the CRISPR case, where there's a dispute over who the inventor is and who should control that intellectual property. We'd like to try to avoid those scenarios. It's really important to us that we foster a very trusting atmosphere within the Institute and also outside, beyond the borders of the Institute. Because it's that trust that's going to enable full disclosure, open sharing of data, the ability for scientists to very quickly build upon and improve upon, the component parts. As immunotherapy increasingly goes from being a lot of basic science work to engineering work and translational work, it's really important that everybody can access the core IP within the field in order to make improvements.
So you made an incredibly generous donation of, starting this whole institute with $250 million, which was extraordinary. How do you sustain the level of funding? Because, are you planning to do this yourself? We have to do telethons every 2 years, and of course we get incredible support from corporations like Major League Baseball and MasterCard and all sorts of people who want to be affiliated with sort of our organization for, I think, partially for PR and partially for humanitarian reasons. So how will you sustain
you're
this
honest
whole
about that.
institute? Yeah.
No, I mean,
That's okay. It's good PR. Good. We're happy.
Everyone's interests are aligned, and I think we're trying to create we're definitely not trying to compete with grant-making organizations, traditional grant-making organizations, because our scientific roadmap is generated by the center directors and co-directors and scientists, members of the institute, sort of in a collaborative process, and so we're not out there taking grant applications from the public. That doesn't mean we wouldn't in the future, or that we aren't interested in lots of research that's happening outside the institute, and we might exercise the ability to go fund that research at some point. But for the most part, our roadmap is developed, amongst the scientists who comprise the institute. Because we have this interesting model where we're helping to administer the IP, we hope that there can be some sort of an evergreen approach here, where at least the costs of the institute can be covered by licensing. And we actually think that is a really important feature because it aligns our interests as a philanthropic organization with the interests of patients who need access to therapies. So if we were a pure biotech, we would have a very single-minded way of looking at the world, a small pipeline of drugs. We'd have to go after it. If we were big pharma, we'd have a similar kind of bottom line to go after. And if we were academic medicine, we could equally do lots of basic science that's not translational at all and has no, without even really thinking about patients. Or we could do work that is very translational and relevant to patients. But in both of those cases, we could be successful. Whereas sitting in the middle, somewhere between a biotech company and traditional academic medicine, gives us this kind of different perspective. We only do well as an organization and perpetuate ourselves if we successfully commercialize drugs, meaning we bring them to patients. And that alignment of incentives between how we as an organization think, how we've programmed this organization to operate, and the need, to have a translational impact is, it's a key part of, I think, how we've tried to put this together.
Part of our goal has been to truncate the number of years it takes to get from lab to clinic, from petri dish, or petri dish to patient, however you want to say it, which traditionally has taken 11 years for the development of a new drug, and we've mandated that it has to be 3 years with obviously the safety regulations in place, et cetera. Have you, is part of your effort going to be to expedite that process? And if so, how do you plan to do that? Is it the incentive to get these drugs out on the market? Do you think that will naturally force a sped up process?
Well, I hope so. It's pretty clear that what we've been doing over the last 20 years hasn't been entirely working on its own. There has been enormous progress, and I don't want to disparage any of the incredible progress that's been made in cancer and other diseases. But I think many people involved with oncology 20 years ago would have thought that things would have happened faster. I think that the belief was that a lot more drugs were on the horizon, especially as we began to understand oncogenic drivers and began to understand mapping the human genome and lowering the cost of sequencing and data and so on. We should have made progress faster. I think that, we might still, things might speed up on their own. I think we're reaching an inflection point where, because of the convergence between technology and data and life sciences, and the fact that a lot of these basic science questions around, for instance, immunology are getting taken down one after another, we could already be at an inflection point where we're going to start seeing progress happening really fast. What's hard to understand, and I think what really motivated the Parker Institute in the first place, was how is it that immunotherapy as a field received so little traditional institutional funding, in particular government funding, for such a long period of time? Now, there were many very notable failures along the way that you could argue set the field back. Many of you in the room are more than familiar with some of that. And yet the basic concept, the remained a good one, and luckily a number of refugees who stuck with it for a very long period of time managed to keep pushing things forward. Yet we're talking about only $50-60 million a year in NCI funding out of a $4 to $5 billion budget, and the average extension of life of a drug that was coming to market, a non-immunotherapy drug, was around 6 months, 4 to 6 months. So meanwhile, the successful immunotherapies have curative potential. They have long-term, durable responses as a result of both immune checkpoint and engineered T cells. So you sort of have to wonder, how is it that the institutional funding sources, the traditional funding sources, the government funding sources managed to overlook this field during its early kind of emergence from relative obscurity?
Well, you actually provided a good segue to my final question, which is the role of government. I know you've spent some time with Vice President Biden. I visited him as well, and I'm wondering how government funds and the ability to really target funds towards immunotherapy treatments, how that is going to change the equation, or how you see all these different collaborative organizations working together or instead of defeating the whole purpose of collaboration, and what role the government you are hoping will play in the future?
I mean, the government, I think, will play a hugely important role, as it always has, in life sciences. I mean, we need this large, healthy backdrop of NIH or NCI funding in order to continue the basic science. And one, an argument, you can make an argument, which I'm sure many of you have heard, that because spending power has been down, essentially the budget's been down at the NIH, safer things get done. A little more incremental research gets done. The bold, ambitious research doesn't necessarily get funded, or takes longer to get funded. Younger researchers don't get funded. The average age of a researcher who's getting a R01 approved is going up. So all of these things can, may have some of their origin in the decline in government funding. So the NIH funding is incredibly important as a background level of funding that needs to be sustained and increased, for the entire field to move forward. I think that Cancer Moonshot has incredible potential, the Vice President's initiative, in terms of catalyzing a generation of people, a generation of scientists to go into this field, to make an impact in the field, to believe that there is hope, and to believe that progress can be made quickly. I think that just anything that we can do, anything government can do to shine a big light on the successes that are occurring, I think is also incredibly helpful.
Because there's as you know, a serious brain drain because these young scientists will write these research proposals, and only 1 in 10 potentially promising research proposals is funded by the NCI right now. And then you have, many of them leaving academia, or leaving actually the U.S. altogether to go to countries like where Singapore, they devote a certain amount of the GDP to cancer research. So there is a lot of room for expansion in terms of government support, isn't there? So it's not just only encouraging young scientists, but it's actually having the government put their money where their mouth is, right?
And being willing to provide this long-term support, but being willing to really to invest in both the curative therapeutic element of life sciences, and also life sciences as an American industry. I mean, this is, if you look at the global average age of the population, and that age is increasing in most places, you realize that an increasing share of GDP is going to be consumed by healthcare. And if that's the case, if markets are increasingly shifting towards a larger healthcare burden, then just selfishly, the U.S. and other countries should be looking at investing more in life sciences, because that's where they're going to get the biggest return, and that's where they're going to get the biggest expansion in their workforce.
Well, it's very, very exciting. Are you really excited about completely jumping into this and staying super involved and expanding on the already incredible efforts that you've made already?
I mean, I've been at this now for 6 years or so, and which is nothing in the scheme of most of the folks here. And I just continue to get more and more excited. These are incredibly exciting times that we're living through, and that's kind of the irony of young scientists not going into the field. Or a lack of funding. This is the single most exciting place any of us could be working at probably the single most exciting moment in history where any of us could be working in this place. It's an extraordinary opportunity, and I'm grateful just to be involved.
It is nice to see scientists get a lot of the spotlight and accolades, because I've always said they're the unsung heroes. They are the ones that are changing the world for so many people, and I feel like thanks to the Parker Institute and other efforts like Stand Up to Cancer, we've really elevated the profile of these brainiac, hardworking, just extraordinary people who are so committed to essentially saving lives. So that's been a fun, I think, thing for you to be able to do as well, hasn't it?
I've met a lot of rock stars, but scientists for me are the biggest rock stars in the world.
Well, we'll end with that. Sean, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
everything
much.
you're doing.